Welcome or welcome back to my channel. I'm James with MaximumCareer.com, and today we're going to be covering how you can craft the best responses to each and every behavioral interview response question. Stick around until the end because I'm not only going to be giving you real life examples, but I'm going to be giving you my 3 secret tips to turning a regular response into a phenomenal and memorable interview response that will absolutely make you stand out amongst all of the other candidates. I hope you're as excited as I am to get started, so let's get to it. So what are behavioral interview questions? At their most basic, a behavioral interview question is any question that asks for an example of your past behavior. This can be anything from the interviewer asking to hear about a past achievement, to a past failure, to a time when you had a conflict with somebody at work. These questions usually start with a telltale sign, and that's the phrase, "Tell me about a time." You've probably heard some of the common ones. Tell me about a time when you've dealt with a difficult customer. Tell me about a time when you failed, and how did you overcome it? Tell me about a time when you've disagreed with your manager. There's a lot of them out there, each with different variations, but I'd say there's somewhere between 10 and 20 standard behavioral interview questions that you can pretty much bet on at some point if you're interviewing frequently enough. There are lots of other interview questions out there that aren't strictly behavioral interview questions, but would still benefit from utilizing a behavioral interview question response. For example, what is your greatest strength? In this question, they're not asking you to share a time when you displayed your greatest strength. They're just asking what you believe your greatest strength is. I would still suggest answering this question by not only sharing what your greatest strength is, but also giving them an example of a time that you demonstrated your strength in the past. That way you get to explain why you find your strength so valuable, and through your example, show them how you'd be bringing that value to the role that you were applying to. Now for this and all of the other standard behavioral interview questions, I've got separate videos diving deep into the best ways to answer each and every one of them. And you can find that in the description and check that out after this video. But what this video is going to do is give you the fundamental understanding of behavioral interview questions, which we will apply to each of those examples. Once you understand what I'm going to go over with you today, you'll be able to easily craft memorable responses to any interview question that comes up. Before I show you how to craft a meaningful behavioral interview response, I think it's important to understand why interviewers, to this day, still insist on asking behavioral interview questions. Now, to an extent, this is going to be different for each behavioral question, but fundamentally, they're all getting at the same thing. When have you dealt with a difficult customer is going to be more focused on how you dealt with a difficult customer, and maybe to an extent, a difficult situation. When have you failed and how did you overcome it wants to know what concrete actions you've taken to turn a failure into a success. But at the core of all of these behavioral interview questions is the same central questions that they really want to know. Why should we hire you? Why are you the right person for this job? What value are you bringing that's better than the next guy? And I think fundamentally, what we should be trying to do with each of our interview responses is attempting to answer those deeper questions, in addition to whatever surface level question they might be asking at the time. As we start forming our answers to specific behavioral interview questions, you're going to find that really all we're doing is telling a story. And I think that's kind of important to view that way. We're going to be getting into a step-by-step approach to planning out and delivering each of these stories. But in doing so, it can be easy to get caught up in the mechanics of your response. So as you form your answers, I want you to keep in mind that what you're trying to accomplish with each of your behavioral interview responses is to show the interviewer that you've provided value in the past and therefore will do so again in the future. Remember those core questions the interviewer is concerned with? Why should we hire you? Why are you the right person for this job? And the way you're going to convince them that you're the best person for this job is by getting the interviewer to visualize you doing the job. If they walk out of the interview and they can visualize you doing the job that they're hiring for, That's what we want. Once we've got that, there's not a whole lot stopping them from giving you the job offer. Behavioral interview questions always use a story as a response. That's what every single behavioral response answer is going to consist of. One of the most commonly accepted ways to format those stories is to use a STAR response. Now, when I say a STAR response, I mean a STAR formatted response. STAR. Situation, task, action, result. At its most basic, the STAR format is just a way to help you create a good story in order to get the most out of your interview response. Because any STAR formatted response is just that, a story. But it's a story that serves a purpose. This story is essentially going to be the story about you doing something that highlights one of your skills or characteristics, which is why a STAR formatted answer is typically used when responding to behavioral questions. Now, I do have a video completely dedicated to exactly what a STAR response is and why it's superior to some of the alternatives out there. But today, we're just going to cover what each of the sections of the STAR formats are and how you can use the STAR format to craft an exceptional response to any behavioral interview question. Situation. The beginning of any story starts with the setup. You're setting the scene and building up the context that the interviewer needs to understand in order to appreciate the rest of your response. That's why the first letter in STAR stands for situation. What is the situation that led to you being amazing? The trick with your scenario is to keep it simple. They don't need to know everything that happened that day. They just need to know enough. They need to know enough to have the rest of your story make sense. Avoid rambling on about things that didn't really play a role in the rest of your STAR response. The next portion of your response is the task portion. This is where you're going to express what was asked of you or what you were trying to accomplish. This can also be the obstacle or challenge you were trying to overcome. It just depends on the specific story. Your task in one of the interview questions might be determining the root cause of an issue. In another, it might be increasing your sales numbers. It could be as simple as you needing to finish a report on time. This doesn't need to be anything crazy here, like a series of elaborate tasks or anything like that. This is just the challenge that you needed to overcome. We specifically call out that task in the context of the situation so that you can clearly tie that actions that you took back to the task or challenge at hand. Which brings us to the A in STAR, which are the actions that you took to overcome that challenge. The action portion of your response is probably going to be the largest section of your response. And that's because, frankly, it's the most important. What actions did you take to accomplish the task that you just talked about? These are going to be concrete actions that show that you understood the issue at hand, knew the best solution for that issue, and had the skills to follow through with that solution and accomplish the task. Now, it helps to throw in some qualification on your actions. I did ABC actions because of XYZ. I added checkpoints to our incident process because I knew that more transparency in communication usually leads to less aggravated customers. But remember, don't go overboard with this. The benefit here is to give the interviewer some insight into what you were thinking and the why behind some of your actions. What you don't want this to turn into is a story about what you were thinking as opposed to a story about what you actually did. Finally, we have results. This one is also straightforward. What were the outcomes of your actions? Hopefully it goes without saying, but try and stick to a positive outcome. Yes, we grow most from our failures, and that's a good life philosophy. But when it comes to interview responses, just leave those moments out. There are some questions, like tell me about a time you failed and how you overcame it, where this type of response is okay and is actually preferred. But for the most part, we're here to show the interviewers that we're competent and know what actions to take to get the desired outcomes. Your results can and should go above and beyond the direct impact of your actions. You developed a new sales technique that helped improve your direct sales by 30% over the course of 6 months. That's great, but don't stop there. That same process that you used to increase your own sales became a standard practice across your entire team, which led to an additional 25% increase in team sales over the next year, which earned you recognition from the CEO and gave you the opportunity to start sharing that process with other areas across the company. The direct results of your actions are great, and sometimes that's really all there is. But when you can, try to maximize your results by incorporating all the other effects that your action had on those around you. Again, just keeping in mind that these impacts should bolster your skills and impacts, not distract from them. This story is still in response to an interview question that has a very targeted purpose. Anything that doesn't serve the specific purpose of this story should be left out. Now, there are alternatives to the STAR format. There's SOAR, situation, obstacle, action, result. There's CAR, challenge, action, result. And I'm sure there's dozens of other acronyms out there to help you format these story responses, all of which are probably fundamentally similar to one another, frankly. Now, anyone who tells you that there's only one way to answer a question is either ignorant or a liar. However, I will say that out of all of the behavioral response formats, I find utilizing the STAR format to be the most helpful. And that's for 2 main reasons. The first is that if the interviewer is going to ask you the question in a specific format, it's gonna be the STAR format, which in and of itself makes the STAR format a helpful format to understand. The second reason is that by separating the situation from the rest of your response, it allows you to reuse the same handful of situations and morph them to the question asked. For example, maybe your situation is that you were part of a project that somebody made a mistake that delayed the whole project completion. Depending on where you want to take this response, you can utilize the same base situation, but branch off to different tasks, actions, and results. With this situation, you might be able to resolve the conflict that arose within the team because of that issue. Your task might be to overcome this failure by completing the project on time with extra effort. Your task could be to deal with the customer who was expecting this project on time and would have to wait. Depending on the interview question asked, you can morph this one story fairly easily to adapt to meet your needs without needing to come up with a completely different situation for each possible question. That's why I find the STAR interview response format to be one of the most dynamic formats amongst the alternatives. STAR bonus number 1. One great way to add a little bit extra to your STAR response is to add a brief lessons learned to the end of your response. This can kind of blend in with your results portion of your story, but it is going to be different, so it's worth calling out as an addition to the traditional STAR format response. While the results are going to be the great things that happened as a result of your actions, your lessons learned is going to allow you to introspect a little and show the interviewer that you're a bit more strategic in your thinking rather than simply cause and effect. Now, what I mean by strategic is that your lessons learned is going to span beyond this one isolated incident. Most of the time, behavioral interview responses are going to include you overcoming some sort of challenge or obstacle, which is great. But what's even better is if you can show that your understanding of the root cause of this situation and share with them how you can take steps to ensure that this issue is unlikely to happen again. That's where your lessons learned comes in. It shows them that you are not only skilled enough to solve a problem, but that you truly understood the problem and are the type of person who learns and grows from these challenges. The ability to be aware and capable of always learning and growing is something that literally every hiring manager is looking for. So this is an easy and valuable add-on to the end of any behavioral question. STAR bonus number 2. The final piece of the puzzle to crafting the perfect behavioral response is to get deeper in your response. You're going to move past exactly what you did and how you did it and you're going to explain your why. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, there's a book called Start With Why by Simon Sinek, who also gave a phenomenal TED Talk by the same name. I highly recommend checking that out if you haven't already. I will leave a link in the description. But the premise of starting with why is that most companies think from the outside in. They say that what their product is, how it's unique or different from others, and just end there. The example given in the TED Talk was a computer company who might say something like, "We make great computers. They're beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. Want to buy one?" Now, this is underwhelming to say the least, but it's what we do all the time in our interviews. We say what we do, we say how we're better or different from other candidates, and then we just hope that the interviewers will pick us out of the 30 other people interviewing for the same role. Instead of starting from the outside, inspirational companies and leaders will always start from the inside and work their way out. The example of this was Apple selling their computers, which might look something like, "In everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. The way we challenge the status quo is by making our products beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. And we just happen to make great computers. Want to buy one?" It's the simple act of starting off the sales pitch with a fundamental belief or philosophy, and then moving into how and what about the product, which is the thing that transforms an average sales pitch into one that's difficult to refuse if you can relate to the why. Now, sure, this example was about selling a computer, but in your interview, you are the product. You are what you're selling, and you can use the exact same approach to get a similar outcome. The way you can do that is by incorporating your why into your behavioral responses. The reason this is going to help you is that from a company's perspective, a candidate whose why closely aligns with the why of the company is an employee who's going to work extra hard, continuously learn, and inspire others to do the same. The hiring manager is going to be looking for employees who have the same why as them and their team's why, because those are going to be infinitely more valuable employees than somebody who's just in it for the paycheck. That's why you want to infuse your why into as many interview responses as you can. And I find the best way to do that is to start off your interview response with your why. This is going to be your belief or your philosophy around the topic that the question is asking. For example, if the interviewer asks you to tell them about a time when you had a conflict with a coworker, instead of just going straight into the story, you might preface that story with the fact that you believe a high-functioning team is always better than a group of high-performing individuals, and that the best way to promote a high-functioning team is through consistent and meaningful communication. And then you get into your star response about how you resolve that conflict, probably by using meaningful communication. See, this way, before you even get into what your skills are and how they're better than everyone else, you've already primed the mind of the interviewer with the core idea that you are going to help turn their team into a high-performing team through excellent communication, because that's your core belief, and that's going to be reflected in all of your actions. The rest of your response is just going to serve to cement that idea in the interviewer's mind. Are you seeing how this is such a powerful tool in your interview? And when you follow up your why with a powerful star story that exemplifies your skills and proficiencies, you are guaranteed to leave a memorable impact on the interviewer, giving you a much better chance of moving on to the next round of interviews or receiving a job offer. Now, I'm not saying that each and every behavioral interview response needs to use all of these things that I just talked about. Not every situation needs a why, especially if it's something that you've already stressed in a different response. Not every story is going to benefit from explicit lessons learned. The point here is that these are tools for you to add to your interview tool belt. Once you understand how to use them, you can mix and match these tools with all of the other interview skills that you've learned in order to become a much more proficient and dynamic interviewer. With all of these new tools in your tool belt to help answer behavioral interview questions, I want to share some of my favorite do's and don'ts when it comes to your interview responses. These are targeted towards behavioral interview responses, but can really be applied to any response throughout your entire interview. The first thing that I want you to avoid is focusing too hard on these star categories when you give your response. I've seen it before. Okay, so the situation was I was working at Walmart on Black Friday. My task, the task was to make sure that all the electronics stayed in order. For my action part, the actions that I took were, hopefully you get it. The delivery of my story felt very strange because I was literally calling out situation, task, action, and result in my response. This is what a lot of new people do when they first get started with star formatted stories. And while it's not gonna tank your interview, it's just eliminates some of the fantastic benefits that can come from a well-delivered story. And that brings me to my first thing that you should be doing, which is practicing your story delivery. In addition to the content of your behavioral stories, you should absolutely be practicing these stories. At least practice your stories out loud and be sure that you can get through each of your stories without too many ums or awkward pauses while you think of what happened next. The whole point of these stories is to take your interviewer on a journey and get them to fully envision you doing these great and miraculous things. That becomes difficult when you keep interrupting your story with likes and ums. You'll also want to get a friend to listen to your story and give honest feedback. Is your story congruent? Does it get the right message across? These are things that can be somewhat difficult to determine for yourself of your own story, so finding someone who will give you that honest feedback is going to be extremely valuable here. And while we're talking about your delivery of a story, let's talk about one of the biggest no-nos when it comes to any interview response, and that's rambling. I know it's easy to start throwing in little tidbits here and there about your stories because you think it makes them more interesting, but most of the time, all you're doing is dragging things out. There's a great quote that says, "If I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter." I don't know who said it, I think Mark Twain, but my 30-second Google search was inconclusive. The point being that getting your point across in as few words as possible is an art in itself and something that you should be striving for throughout your entire interview. The name of the game is relevancy. And when you waste time in your interview responses with irrelevant fluff, you're not only wasting the interviewer's time, but frequently those irrelevant portions of response can distract from the important parts of your story, which is something you really want to avoid. Everything in your response should be relevant to the specific question that you're answering, which gets into my next piece of advice, and that is thinking about your interview holistically. What I mean by that is that every single interview response is an opportunity to express something to the interviewer. Sometimes you're trying to impress them with your technical wizardry, and other times you just might want to get across your emotional intelligence. For the most part, you have several options when answering any interview question. To choose exactly what strength you're going to be emphasizing, you want to spread these out over the entire interview to come across as a well-rounded candidate. Remember, once you've proven that you're qualified for the position, you want to spend your time getting them to like you and imagining you as a functional member of the team. Thinking of your interview as a culmination of each of your responses rather than individual one-off answers is going to allow you to send the exact message that's more likely to get you the job. I hope you found this video helpful. I put a lot of time and effort into it, so if you did get value out of it, it would mean the world to me if you'd like this video. And if you think I missed something or want to know more about anything I mentioned, just leave a comment and I'll respond. Unfortunately, I don't have any paid products to pitch to you, but I do have a bunch of free stuff if you want, so that's all in the description. Truthfully, I just want to help as many people get into better jobs. And for me, that means making more videos and getting these videos out there. So if you want to see those videos when they come out, be sure to subscribe and press the little bell icon to get notifications whenever they come out.